This video is brought to you by A-Main Hobbies and Raceline Designs. Click the links in the description below. In my last video, I talked mostly about things that would help the RC industry grow. In this video, I'm going to mainly address a few things that might be hurting it in some way or another, and things that I think could help from the perspective of an average racer. Now, before I begin, I'd like to actually ask you guys a favor. If at any point during this video I sound preachy or biased, I want you to hit the dislike button. That way, I'll get a good idea as to how you guys stand on the issues I plan to go over, and it should keep me honest and give me a good idea if I come off like a know-it-all preacher. Before I begin, however, I'd like to thank A-Main Hobbies for supporting this channel. Anything you guys buy using the link in the description below will directly support me as well. First up, let's go over a uniquely United States problem when it comes to 8th skill racing in particular, and that's the sportsman, intermediate, and pro level debacle we find ourselves in now. If you're outside of the US, let me break it down for you. Drivers at large 8th skill events and sometimes 10th skill events are divided up into arbitrary skill levels based on where the driver themselves think they belong at any given event. It's basically an honor system that's flimsy at best when it goes smoothly and not so much when it doesn't. This brings me to the first problem that a lot of racers tend to point out, and that's the subject of sandbagging, or as I like to call it in gaming terms, smurfing. Sandbagging, or smurfing, basically means you're intentionally putting yourself into a lower bracket of skill level to get an easy win. This happens in multiplayer games all the time, and it's done by creating a new account and intentionally throwing to make it look like you're bad to the game's matchmaking system. In RC, this happens when drivers who themselves may not be good drivers, but not good enough to make it into the big show. As a result, they put themselves into a lower skill level to get a higher chance of getting into those long A-mains in Nitro, or triple or double A-mains in Electric. Notice how I didn't say sponsored driver though. Keep that in mind for later. In the end, this causes a lot of drivers to point fingers at winners of specifically intermediate and especially sportsman's classes and say they're essentially sandbagging. Lots of drivers outside of the US would say just get rid of the sportsman, intermediate, and pro driver split as a whole. And I do understand that and somewhat agree, but unfortunately lots of drivers in America don't see it that way, both pros and not so pros. Pro drivers might say they don't want to have to deal with another driver who doesn't know how to control their car. But a not pro will say they don't enjoy racing when they have to pull over for every car that comes up behind them. Now there are solutions to this problem, and one of them is that sportsman, intermediate, and pro split, even though it is sort of a band-aid fixed. Another idea, coming from a friend of mine, Charlie Mack, is the idea of running a privateer, open, and pro class. I was going to let him explain it, but the VOD is 2 hours long, and I don't want to fry my hard drive, so instead I'll try and paraphrase it to the best of my ability. The privateer class would be sort of a light class that would run 2 qualifiers and a main on Saturday. It would cost the least amount to run and take the least amount of time to complete. Open would be similar to what we run now at large racetime-like events. 3 qualifiers on Saturday and a main on Sunday. The open class would be the largest, and in terms of the middle, in terms of population, and the middle in terms of price. The pro class would be for, well, factory pros, and they would have a lot more structure in terms of their practice schedule during the weekend and when they're allowed to run on the track. They would also cost the most to enter. Now I'm skimming over a lot in terms of what Charlie Mack actually said, so if you're watching this, if you put in the comments a more detailed explanation, I'll pin it so everyone can see it. Overall, it seems like a sound idea that would need a decent amount of structure to work properly. Another idea I think would help a little bit would be to have a system in place that would sort of sort people out based on their previous standings in other events before the racing even begins. This leads me neatly onto the British, who when it comes to RC, seems like they got their stuff sorted out. From what I understand from my extensive and well-documented sources and research, the BRCA, or if you're curious, is basically the roar of the UK, has a much firmer and well-regulated grip on RC racing as a whole in the UK. Pretty much every racer is a member, and every track/event has some sort of link to the BRCA. Because of this, every race you go to is cataloged and put into a leaderboard that you can actually look at online. Now there's a lot of different parts to RC racing in the UK that I can put into a video on its own, but I'll save that for July when I actually visit the place. To put it shortly, you have different levels of licenses that categorize you not based on an honor roll system, but based on how you placed in different events. Once you make it to level 1, of which there's level 5 through 1, you can no longer participate in the level 2 or lower events. Every race also gives you a certain amount of points which can move you up or down on a leaderboard that you can actually see yourself online. This is grossly oversimplified, but the point is, in order for Roar to do something similar, which it seems like they're trying to do, a few things need to happen. Roar in the US has up until recently been the laughingstock of the RC racing governing bodies in the world. There was a time when Roar was taken more seriously, but when I got back into RC racing in the fall of 2020, Roar was seen as kind of a joke that didn't really do anything right and seemed to have no interest in growing the sport of scale motorsports. As a result, lots of tracks and most racers simply don't have memberships and aren't registered Roar tracks, only using Roar rules as loose guidelines to sort of do their own thing. Think race time events or any of Joy's races out west. Now that Roar has been led by someone who actually seems to care about RC racing and is making an attempt to get some sort of baseline going in the US, you'd expect US-based racers would be happy to see some form of progress. This is where we're going to get very cultural, so keep that in mind going forward. When it comes to US-based culture, we are extremely individualistic, and in this case, to a fault. Nobody likes to be told they can't use something for any reason. Case in point, take a look at the reaction to buggy bodies being banned at Roar events effective 2025. Same thing with the slot machine debacle not too long before that. Also, because of this individualism, people like to do their own thing when it comes to racing events and tracks. We have a lot of different series here in the US that are very loosely connected, if at all. Europe, and by extension Europeans, aren't like this. They have a much more collective mindset along with being more connected as a whole, at least on the surface. It also doesn't help that Americans can be quite stubborn, as I've said before. There are many people in RC racing now who wouldn't go to a Roar racing event even if it was in their backyard. Unfortunately, this is something that Roar has to deal with, and in this case, I don't even know where to begin with this situation. I suppose a good place to start would be to piggyback off of other events that are already taking place around the country, like having North Georgia Shootout or Peach State Classic count as a Roar regional. In short, I think Roar needs to make as much ground in the racing scene as they can to gain a lot of support by being consistent in their handling of rules, and by being as transparent as possible with what they intend to do in the future going forward. Once they do that, which they kind of already are, then we can do all the cool leaderboard stuff and point system and such. Then, I also wanted to talk about stock racing, specifically stock racing in the United States. I already made a video about how expensive stock racing can be, and it seemed to go over well with you guys. Why don't we talk about some of the issues attributed to stock racing and how I think they can be resolved? First off, of course, is the cost. Stock racing can get very expensive very quickly. From ceramic bearings to titanium screws and turnbuckles, lightweight aluminum top shafts, and so much more. This is where I think we can look to an unlikely source to help solve the issue of having to pay to play the stock game. If you've ever heard of spec/slash racing, you can kind of get an idea of where I'm going with this. When it comes to spec/slash classes, you're only allowed to run what comes out of the box and what is made by Traxxas themselves. We can also turn to on-road racing, specifically in the UK, and to help further my point, Euro truck racing. In Euro truck or Tamiya Mini classes, you're only allowed to make certain changes to keep the costs down and the racing close. Some clubs don't even allow you to make any changes from box stock at all, but others do allow it. This is to allow newcomers to get used to tuning and upgrading their racing rig to improve its performance, but not so much that it feels unfair to race someone with deeper pockets than you. I think this can be transferred to two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive buggy. You're only allowed to run what comes out of the box, spec tires, cheap fixed timing spec motors, but allow leniency for tuning aids like springs and shock oil. Like I said before with the Tamiya Euro truck classes, encourage tuning, but discourage wallet dumping. Next up, we have the question of sponsorships and contracts in general. Back in ye olden days of RC was all word of mouth, magazines, and some commercials on TV here and there. As a result, the only people who had any sway or influence on the racing scene were people who made it into the big show. These days, I shouldn't have to say things are very, very different. Any rando with a camera, microphone, and an okay idea of how to edit a video can gain a lot of reach regardless of what spot they place in. And that reach is always what manufacturers have wanted, not just the results at a race. Sure, the results help with reach, but when was the last time Mark Santamaria made the big show at a racetime event in a nitro buggy? When was the last time Kevin Talbot was the final in the BRCA event? When was the last time Lefty drove a nitro buggy? Oh. What I can say is their reach in the world of RC racing and beyond is far greater in what they recommend and push compared to whoever won big race number 7 of the year. Specifically in racing, not just bashing. My point is sponsorships and especially contracts don't take skill into account nearly as much as they used to. And I think a lot of older racers and racers who are making that big show at many events haven't fully adjusted to that yet. Whether or not you consider this change a good or a bad thing is up to you. For me, I don't see anything wrong with making someone who is active in RC and helpful in RC feel like they're contributing it more than just giving money to the track owner, to make them feel like they're part of something bigger. And if it keeps them coming back to the sport and helps bring people into the sport and keeps them around, I'm not going to complain. The issue seems to stem from the fact that some drivers and other companies kinda abuse the current system we have now. Drivers always want to get a better deal, and it would seem as though many different manufacturers are willing to give them those deals, and only to racers that already race rather than putting more effort into trying to get more people into racing to inflate the market share. I'm personally not too much of a fan of Traxxas or Horizon Hobby, but they serve a very important role in getting the word of hobby-level RC cars out there to people who otherwise would have never even known RC cars were a thing. I've never seen a racing ad on YouTube, nor have I seen any racing RC manufacturer sponsor a full-size racing team or car, at least not recently. Team Associated going to SEMA and showing off an RC10 and a full-size RT10 was a good start, but I'd like to see more public outreach from other brands and tracks as well. Overall, we as a collective group have a lot of work to do to make sure that RC racing continues into the future. If you have any ideas you'd like to share that you would think help the hobby grow, be sure to put them in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more. Also, if you want to support me another way, you can subscribe to my Patreon, where I post updates and teasers as to when my videos are going to come out. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my active patrons Micah Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Joe Jenkins, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Logan Judkins, and especially Buddy Howell and Morrison Watt. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.